to be part of the Thought Leader webinar series, and we're grateful to all of you for joining today's session on the Learning Business Maturity Model. I'm Celisa Steele, and today Jeff Cobb and I are going to talk about that Learning Business Maturity Model, what it is, and how you can use it to set strategic direction at your organization. So to start off, we're going to provide some very brief background on Tagoras, and then we're going to define learning business, because that term is really central to the maturity model and all that we're going to be talking about today. And then once we have that key term defined, we're going to take a look at our Learning Business Manifesto. This is a work that's fresh off our mental presses, so to speak, and then we're going to turn to the Learning Business Maturity Model and delve into the 5 domains and the 4 stages that it covers. We're going to provide some suggested next steps for how you can use the model to assess the maturity of your organization's learning business and to maybe help set plans for your growth and improvement. We will save time for questions and comments at the end, but we also invite you to submit questions and comments as we go along. Jeff is keeping an eye on the question panel, and he may pause to address a question or a comment along the way. And we really want you to understand the Learning Business Maturity Model and how to use it. So please do ask questions or share comments at any point as we go along. And so now, Jeff, will you tell folks a little bit about our background?
Great, thanks, Lisa. So we want to provide just a little bit of background so you'll know the perspective that we're bringing to today's discussion. Celisa and I together have more than 30 years experience in the world of education and technology, and the majority of that time has been spent working with learning and education businesses, where we often help to set strategy, and then often the learning and education businesses we work with are part of a trade or professional association. So, we've written a number of publications that focus in that direction, including Association Learning Plus Technology and Social Learning Trends in the Association Space. We've also co-founded 2 events, the Leading Learning Symposium, which is an event for leaders in the business of lifelong learning, and then also Learning Technology Design, or LTD, which is intended more broadly for anyone interested in achieving maximum impact with their use of technology for learning. So in short, we've been working with and watching organizations in the business of lifelong learning for a long time, and it's that experience really that's led us to develop the Learning Business Maturity Model that we'll be talking about today. So before we go much further, I want to define learning business, since that term is right there in the title of the Learning Business Manifesto and the Learning Business Maturity Model. So don't confuse learning business with the term learning organization, which is another popular term. And a learning organization is an organization that pays attention to what works and what doesn't, adapts, grows. And in that sense, every business really should seek to be a learning organization, but that's not really what we're getting at when we say learning business. A learning business, as we define it, has to meet 2 criteria. And the first is that a fundamental reason for its existence is to generate revenue through selling learning and education experiences to a target audience. And in most cases, this means net positive revenue or profit. The second is it has to self-identify as a business, meaning the majority of the people working in the business recognize that revenue generation is a fundamental reason for the business's existence. And it can be helpful to be clear about what we feel is not a learning business, just to make the definition of learning business clearer. So most corporate training does not fall in the learning business category. While corporate training can and should obviously contribute to business success, it's typically a cost center, and its audience is primarily internal to the company. And we'll leave aside for a moment the trendy concept of extended enterprise. In most cases, it's still internally focused in the company. We also don't think of traditional academic institutions, for the most part, as being learning businesses as we define them. Many public institutions are heavily subsidized, and even institutions that do have to generate at least break-even revenue, whether they're public or private, even in those institutions, it's rare for that requirement to be emphasized or arguably even recognized outside of a small segment of the administration. So they're shaky at best on the first criterion, and they rarely meet the second criterion. Now, there are exceptions, even within academia, which can lead us to the types of organizations that we do feel qualify as learning business. So in the academic world, For example, continuing education and extension programs often fall in this learning business camp. These parts of colleges and universities are often run more like private training and education companies, and those are another type of organization which we would definitely classify as learning businesses, those private training and education companies. And then lastly, we'd say that most trade and professional associations are learning businesses, or at the very least run learning businesses within their overall business. And we feel that's true whether an organization is selling education and training directly, or it provides access to learning opportunities, whether those are formal or informal, as part of the benefit of membership. In either case, learning is driving revenue and should be treated as a business. So hopefully that offers a reasonable idea of what we mean by learning business.
Great. So with that definition behind us, we next want to share with you our Learning Business Manifesto. And we want to share it because it really underpins our thinking in general, and it certainly influenced the development of the Learning Business Maturity Model. And so the manifesto is kind of a quick way to get a look at what we see as key issues and drivers for learning businesses. So the manifesto states that lifelong learning is the imperative of our age, and those who lead learning in their fields will lead their fields. So in other words, learning is at the very heart of the value your organization offers. In today's world where change is happening more rapidly than ever, where people are changing jobs more frequently than before, where people are living longer, learning is not a nice to have or something you can even check off your list as completed when you leave high school or college or even grad school. Lifelong learning is imperative. And so there are 5 supporting principles that go along with the baseline manifesto. And the first one is that learners don't value expertise. Learners might claim to value expertise, and learners might say that the experts delivering the education are important to them. But what people truly value and come back for are outcomes. They value and come back for the application of what they learn, not for the experts. Learners really aren't interested in features and inputs, despite what a lot of marketing copy often conveys. And we think that savvy learning businesses get this, and they don't try to focus on specific fixed subject matter expertise. Instead, they focus on offering highly relevant and practical learning opportunities that learners can apply to their daily work and to their lives.
And the second point in the manifesto is that if you can't see it, they can't see it. And the it here could be replaced by vision or value or impact. You have to have and articulate a vision for the impact of your education, for the value of what you offer, for the measurable impact of what you're doing. Because if you don't articulate that vision or value or impact, you can't assume that learners are going to see it.
And then the third point in the manifesto is that good design is the enemy of impact. And I see this as being related to the idea that perfection prevents progress. A learning business can get caught up in the trappings of learning, the perfectly phrased learning objectives, or the overly rigorous commitment to an interaction every 2 minutes in an e-learning experience. Often what's really needed to result in impactful learning is something much less sexy. What's essential is usually setting the context, why this is important to learn. And that doesn't have to happen through bullet points with action verbs. What's essential is that the learners engage with the content and begin applying it, and that may happen as readily by offering just a simple verbal reflection question as by building out really slick interactions. I also want to say that I think good design is often at odds with innovating and iterating rapidly. A minimum viable product, or MVP, that can be a great way to float a trial balloon and see if a new learning offering will have impact. But minimum viable products, by definition, aren't polished. They don't fit the classic good design definition, but they could have huge impact.
And then the fourth point is marketing is education is marketing. So if you want to educate, you must market. And we have a couple of points in mind here. First, is the rise of content marketing and a focus on marketing that delivers educational value. And you've probably seen a lot of this. There's been a huge buzz about content marketing in recent years. A lot of marketing, and really most of the best marketing is educationally oriented at this point. So, things like this webinar are an example. So are, the podcasts that we offer and so many others offer, articles, videos, all of those sorts of things. The second point is that educational offerings are very often their own best source of marketing. So each educational offering that is part of your portfolio right now represents one of the best opportunities there is for highlighting and promoting the other educational offerings that are in your portfolio or that you plan to produce. So your easiest sale is always to your current customers. Current course and conference customers are going to be some of your most receptive buyers of education, but you have to be sure to market to them as they are engaging in education. And that doesn't mean shoving it down their throats. I know some folks are probably cringing listening to this, but we're not talking about, the classic selling from the stage. It does mean, however, making sure they are aware of your other relevant offerings and how they fit into the overall value story that you're telling as an education business. So you end up with what we characterize as a value loop in which your marketing educates people about your education then markets to people, and so on. As a successful learning business, you need to really think through and execute strongly on creating that value loop.
And then the fifth and the final point in the manifesto is that learning is noun and verb. So learning is a thing. It's what we deliver to learners. But learning is also an action. It's what learners have to do, and not only do once, but they have to do on an ongoing basis. You might have heard, as we have, of calls to move away from one-off events and to stop focusing on products, and that, instead we need to embrace learning as a process. And that's certainly true. We do believe that learning is a process. But it's also true that one-time events and products are part of how we keep the process going. So the events and products alone aren't enough, but they're still essential to the process. So learning is made up of transactions, these time-specific exchanges, and it's made up of relationships, so these enduring, ongoing interactions. So lifelong learning is the goal we strive towards, and it's what we must engage in to reach that goal. It's noun and verb. So these are the 5 supporting principles that go along with the Learning Business Manifesto, and if some of these sound somewhat counterintuitive or provocative, good. That's on purpose. We're hoping that they sound that way. Manifestos are associated with revolutions, and that's what we think is needed in lifelong learning, a revolution. And so we wanted to share the manifesto here because it's bedrock, that idea that lifelong learning is the imperative of our age, and those who lead learning in their fields will lead their fields. That's what led us to the learning business maturity model. And the most mature, well-developed learning businesses get that learning is imperative these days, and they do lead learning in their fields, and thereby they lead their fields. And so with that, we'll leave the manifesto and turn to the maturity model.
So, we developed the learning business maturity model because, as we indicated at the beginning of the webinar, we've been working with organizations in the business of lifelong learning, continuing education, and professional development for decades now, and we've seen, so much that those organizations are doing. And as part of that, we've seen commonalities and problems over our years of working with organizations, and we've also seen significant opportunities that organizations are often unable to see or capitalize on because they're too mired in the problems and issues that they may have. And there are often significant commonalities in these opportunities, and in general we haven't seen enough collaboration within or among organizations or enough innovation and sharing to innovate to address the problems and to capitalize on the opportunities. So the aim with the maturity model was to provide a framework to help surface and assess problem areas and to provide a common language, among organizations that are in this business, and then to provide a clear way to move from problem to opportunity, and then we hope to innovation. So the model is hopefully, not only descriptive and, providing some language that helps to describe what we're doing as learning businesses, but also prescriptive and motivational, and something that prompts action and that gives that action a direction and a focus. So, you may note in the fine print at the bottom of the model here that this is version 1.1, and we plan to iterate on it and improve the model and the assessment that goes along with it, which we'll talk about as we hear from those who are making use of it in their organizations. And we've already started to do that, and a huge part of the reason we're introducing this, a huge part of the reason we want to do webinars like this is we hope you will embrace it. We hope you will try it out within your organization, that you'll take the assessment that we'll talk about, and that you will take some action, and then hopefully that you'll share that data with us, and more importantly with the learning business community more broadly, so we can all get better and more mature and more effective and more impactful at what we do.
And so the learning business maturity model gauges maturity according to characteristics and performance in 5 domains. These are domains that we've found to be critical to the success of the learning and education businesses we've been involved with over our years of experience. And they are leadership, strategy, capacity, portfolio, and marketing. And in the cases in which the learning business is part of a larger organization, as it is with many trade associations and professional societies, the model deals with these domains in the context of the learning and education line of business, so not the entire organization. So with that first domain, leadership, for example, we're talking about the leadership of the learning business, not necessarily the leadership of the overall organization. And in the domain of leadership, the maturity model looks at questions like, how clear is the vision for the learning and education business? How is accountability for achieving the vision shared and sustained over time? Is there a culture of learning throughout the organization and its audience? And then in that second domain, the domain of strategy, we're looking at things like, how clearly articulated is the strategy? Has the strategy been communicated and embraced broadly throughout the organization? Are clear metrics established and tracked? And does the organization adjust strategy based on the data that it's capturing?
And then the next area is capacity, and I'll say before I talk about that a little bit more, we challenge you as we're talking about these domains and raising these questions, and as you're listening, to take those questions to heart and reflect on them. Celisa just highlighted, some areas of leadership like vision. Ask yourself, do we have that vision? This goes back to the manifesto. If you can't see it, they can't see it. So are you articulating a vision for your education business that speaks to how you're trying to change the field and industry you're serving for the better? Does that come through in your marketing? Does it come through in how you position yourself in your market? Because again, if you don't see that and if you're not articulating it, they're not going to get it. And that vision is so fundamental to leadership, and strategy is so important. Ask yourself, how strong a strategy do we have? How clearly have we articulated those objectives? We know from our research that most organizations do not have any sort of articulated strategy, particularly relative to their online learning and education. That has to be in place to be able to effectively mature as an organization, to be able to communicate throughout the organization the ways in which you're going to achieve that vision. And then this third point, capacity, and the fundamental question here is, does the organization have sufficient capacity in terms of human resources and in terms of technology to pursue the vision and strategy effectively? And that's increasingly a challenge for organizations that are in the learning and education business, as this has grown so rapidly, as things have changed so much, as that competition has increased. Oftentimes organizations do not have the staff in place, do not have the technology in place, and are challenged to get them in place. We hear again and again, and it seems more and more recently, that organizations are trying to fill positions or train people so that they do have the right capacity to mature, and kudos to those organizations that they actually recognize it and are trying to make that effort. But you have to recognize that, and you have to consciously say, do we have that capacity, and what are we going to do about it if we don't? The fourth point is portfolio. The fourth domain is portfolio, and this is where we start to get into what you're actually offering as part of your educational experiences. So for example, are the content, methodologies, and modalities you're using aligned with well-researched, thoroughly understood learner needs. So basically, you know, are you up with the times and with the research in how learning actually happens effectively, and does your content, your methodology, your modalities actually reflect that? And then secondly, and this is, we think, one of the, you know, the biggest questions for a successful learning business is the impact of learning assessed at multiple levels over time? So are you having an impact, and are you measuring that, and are you going to be able to show that and communicate that out to the people that you are serving? And then finally, the fifth domain is marketing. And you know, you heard me say earlier as part of the manifesto that marketing is education, is marketing. The two are so intertwined now. You really have to have a great command of each and understand how they interrelate and how they create that value loop that we talked about a little bit earlier. So, you know, here you might be asking, for example, is there a validated understanding of the overall market and competitive environment? So do you really understand the market that you're trying to serve? Do you really understand the competitive environment? And, you know, are you actually measuring that? Are you going out and you know, not just relying on anecdotal evidence, but using methodologies that are going to help you to understand? So a next question would be, are appropriate marketing methodologies used consistently and tracked for effectiveness? So, you know, are you doing the measurement you need to? Are you getting the data you need to about your market? And then as you're actually going out there and implementing, are you getting evidence that that you're actually reaching your market with what you're offering? So those are the five domains. And at this point, we just want to run a couple of quick polls here just to kind of gauge where you think you fall on those domains. So the first of these is going to be, in which of the five domains do you intuitively think your learning business is strongest? So is it leadership, is it strategy, is it capacity, is it portfolio, or is it marketing? And usually businesses are going to be stronger, you know, in one of these than the others. They're going to be able to hang their hats on something. So what is your learning business strongest in, just intuitively, your judgment of it? And we're going to take just another 15, 20 seconds here. Those of you who are multitasking, now is the time when you need to come to your screen and make a choice. Okay, we're going to close down that one, and then we want to ask a corresponding one. And it looks like folks are thinking they're strongest in strategy here and about equal in the others, but we also want to ask, in which ones do you think you are the weakest? So which is the one that that you really need to work on in your organization if you're going to kind of progress in the type of maturity that we're talking about here? So again, we'll get some voting here, and we got, looks like, some more folks paying attention at this point. So give it just another few seconds, and then we're going to close this down and see where people think they are weakest. Okay, so it looks like leadership is the weakest area. Interestingly, strategy, you know, is tying for second, even though it was the strongest as well, and we often find that's the case. Some organizations think they're very strong in strategy, others think they're very weak. But strategy and marketing, which we think of as two sides of the same coin, to be honest, second weakest here. People tend to think they're okay in capacity and portfolio. Which, you know, often that feels like the familiar ground. You tend to know your staff, your technology, your portfolio, but oftentimes that's a danger zone because you are so familiar with it, you may not actually be seeing what your true strengths and weaknesses are there, and that's often an area that can really, you know, it's not as obvious, so really needs some of the level of assessment that we're going to offer up here as part of the learning business maturity model.
Well, thanks for sharing your thoughts in terms of where you think you are. So those are the five domains, but the other aspect of the maturity model are the stages. And we see maturity progressing through 4 stages. So stage 1 we characterize as static, stage 2 reactive, stage 3 proactive, stage 4 is innovative. And in each of those stages we gauge maturity according to characteristic and performance in those 5 domains that we just covered. So leadership, strategy, capacity, portfolio, and marketing. And so what we want to do next is offer 4 profiles that are basically generic snapshots of learning businesses at each stage of maturity. Now these generic snapshots assume similar performance across all 5 domains, but in reality, most businesses will perform better in some of the domains and worse in others. So, just as we saw, you might think you're really strong in strategy, but weak in leadership, or vice versa. And that's pretty common. So in stage 1, the learning business is largely static. So you're maintaining the status quo, you're kind of doing what you've always done with limited, if really any, attempts to respond to changing needs or emerging opportunities. Your relationships with learners are largely transactional in this stage, and they're driven by securing registrations for whatever offering is the current priority. And not very focused on developing longer-term relationships. So in terms of leadership, organizations at this stage are often characterized by a leadership vacuum. So there's no clear vision for what the organization aims to achieve with its learning and education initiatives. The learning business is really operationally focused. There's usually not clear accountability or responsibility for the success or failure of the learning business. And then the strategy for the learning business, if one exists at all, is usually poorly articulated. So the objectives aren't clear, and often meaningful measurements haven't been established. And then in terms of capacity, the necessary human resources and technology resources that are needed to address learning needs, those are lacking. And when we're talking about human resources, we're considering both staff and contract resources. When we're talking about technology, we're thinking about often both the internal and external resources. And then the processes that should support the learning business are usually also poorly defined, or maybe they aren't even documented at all. And then in terms of the portfolio of learning products and services, usually what exists has been there for some time without significant change, and so a business at this stage is kind of marked by a "we've always done it that way" attitude, and there's usually no meaningful assessment of learner needs. Learning offerings tend to focus on pure information versus change in performance or behavior, and evaluations of learning offerings tend to focus on smile sheets, so sort of that Kirkpatrick level 1 reaction type responses. And then in terms of marketing, the business does not have a validated understanding of its market and the competitive environment. Its understanding of its audience is unnuanced, so usually there aren't any segments and there are no priorities identified in the audience, and then the marketing methodologies are used in a limited, random, unmeasured way. And then the business has a weak brand, if any, that's separate from the organizational brand, which is also probably weak. And I think Jeff has a question or comment he wants to insert here.
Right, I thought I'd interject because we do have a couple of questions that have come in from John Alexson, who's obviously paying close attention here, and I do want to respond to what John is saying, because I think they're very good observations and questions. One, he says that capacity is often an overlooked weakness, as we were just commenting, and he wants to know, do we see associations really committing to the employees they need to administer technology? And he says, the space often has a lot of turnover. Can you comment on the impact? And I would say we at least anecdotally, and this is something we do actually plan to do some research on to find out more about, at least anecdotally though, we're finding more organizations that are creating new positions and are hiring to staff, particularly for managing online learning technologies and just managing that part of the business in general. So they may have control over the learning management system. They may be working with subject matter experts around webinars, getting the content put in and configured, and all the sorts of things that go with that line of business. We have seen much more of that. We've actually written a number of job descriptions lately, and have helped a number of organizations actually spread the word about openings that they have. So we hope that that's a trend that we're going to see grow, but historically certainly it has been overlooked and I think undervalued within the industry and or within the association sector in general, and not just in the technology area. I think across the education department in general, to that leadership question, we've seen in research we've done that, very few organizations have, for example, a chief learning officer, even if they have a chief information officer or a chief technology officer. So it just hasn't been given quite the same status, even though it's such a fundamental part of the organization's mission and business model. And the other question that John asked, which I think is one we often prompt with this point, is that he says the manifesto seemed to downplay expertise, and the follow-on is, isn't that the one leg up for associations, the expertise among memberships, among the membership, and yes, it definitely is an initial leg up for associations, or it can be, at least, if you're actually really truly able to form good relationships with your subject matter experts and capitalize on having access to those experts. That can be extremely valuable, but the way we put it is that expertise will sell them, but expertise will not keep them coming back. So the experts have to deliver. In other words, you have to get those outcomes, because that's what people ultimately ultimately value. In fact, we do a lot of surveying around this, and we ask, what are the value factors you consider when you are making an educational purchase, whether you're going to participate in education or not. And as you might expect, most people do say they're looking at the reputation of the expert, the experience of the expert, because that's good selling material for them to make a quick judgment by. But the thing that comes in second consistently, we've run this survey many times now and are surprised at how consistently it comes in, is that they want to see evidence of that the learning experience has actually improved performance and knowledge for the people who participate in it. And these are lifelong learners, your learners who are saying that they want to see this, and ultimately we feel it comes down more to that. Yes, you need the expertise, you need to be able to showcase your experts, but more than that, much more than that, you need to be able to deliver. That's what the learners really value.
Yeah, and another sort of spin we've put on that before is that it's not about the subject matter expertise. That is kind of the initial leg up that's often out there for associations, but it's about application expertise, which is the point you were just making, Jeff, about it's really about, can you then take this subject matter and actually apply it to your work and life. So stage 2, the learning business is largely reactive, so it's really in danger of responding to vocal minorities rather than proactively making decisions and working to influence the direction of learning in the field or industry that it serves. In its day-to-day operations, a stage 2 learning business remains largely transactional, though there are maybe some aspiration towards cultivating longer-term learner relationships. So in this stage, leadership, there's usually a sense of vision, but it's often driven by a lone wolf, so no widespread buy-in. There may be accountability for the current performance of the learning business, but there's often no shared understanding of how that performance is going to be sustained or improved over time. A strategy exists, or at least in the minds of those most involved with the learning business, but the strategy doesn't provide for effective differentiation, and maybe more importantly, the strategy hasn't been communicated and embraced broadly, and it's not consistently tracked and measured. And then in terms of capacity, the existing resources are adequate, at least more or less, for current needs, but they're insufficient for innovation and growth. And major processes are implicitly understood by those who have to use them, but the processes are poorly documented, if at all. And so there's significant room for improving. And then in terms of the portfolio dimension, there's still some sacred cows and things that are done just because, but attempts are made to assess learner needs, though they're inconsistent and don't necessarily adhere to a strong methodology. There's some offerings that target learner performance versus being just purely informational, and some evaluation efforts that target higher levels than just those reaction-focused smile sheets. And there's also probably some technology in place to aid with the development, delivery, tracking of learning at this point. And then in the marketing domain, the business is really seeking to understand the market and the competitive environment, but it's using primarily anecdotal means. So, it might be getting input from board committees or, from kind of ad hoc discussions with colleagues. And the availability of learning offerings is communicated with some consistency, usually through just a single channel, though, usually email. And so kind of overall marketing execution is weak, and the tracking of results, if any, is pretty limited.
So in stage 3, things start to get quite a bit better. The business has evolved to be more proactive in serving the market. So it responds to the market in a more informed and thoughtful manner, and it may occasionally even attempt to uncover and articulate learning needs that aren't immediately apparent to its customers. So businesses in this stage are definitely more collaborative, both in their internal operations and in their relationships with their customers. And then in terms of the domains here, for leadership, there's a cross-functional team of people that share a relatively clear vision for learning and education and share responsibility and accountability. In learning and education businesses that are part of a larger organization, this cross-functional team may include people from outside the learning and education business. So they may not all be learning and education staff, but they are still part of a leadership team, basically. And while there is, room for greater clarity, there's definitely, a shared understanding of how the learning and education business will be sustained and improved over time. In terms of strategy, there is a strategy for the learning and education business that aims to provide for effective differentiation, and that's been communicated across the organization. And success metrics have been established and are tracked and are responded to with some consistency. In terms of capacity, the resources are adequate for current and emerging needs, and there's some investment, at least, in innovation and growth. All of the key processes are documented at least reasonably well at this point, and the business invests at least periodically in the development of its staff and volunteers. So the professional developers actually start developing themselves to a reasonable degree. In terms of the portfolio, while the business has a good awareness of learner needs, it still struggles to consistently translate that awareness into actions. And similarly, the business has a good awareness of current learning theory and practices, but it could improve in putting those into practice more consistently. And the importance of meaningful evaluation is embraced at this stage of maturity, and efforts are made to assess the impact of learning offerings beyond just the typical smile sheet level that you see in most organizations, but still these efforts are somewhat inconsistent. And then finally, with respect to marketing, stage 3 businesses will periodically attempt to assess the market and the competitive environment and make an effort to establish segments and priorities within the target audience. And they make thoughtful use of multiple marketing channels with some ongoing attempts to measure the results and to adjust based on those measurements. And then some effort is taken to establish and maintain a clear brand for the learning and education business, so not just under the umbrella of the overall organizational's brand, but the learning and education business itself starts to have a little bit of a brand. Stage 4, what we call the innovative stage. At this point, the learning business may be considered mature. And while it's responsive to market needs, organizations at this stage are also innovative in discovering learning needs that are not immediately obvious to their customers, and in developing effective approaches to elevating performance and achieving across the fields and industries they serve. So in short, these businesses lead learning, and leading learning is a big theme of ours. So that said, these businesses certainly have to be careful not to rest on their laurels. Maintaining a business at this level requires ongoing diligence and discipline, and there's always room for growth and improvement, and there's always the danger of slipping back. So you have to be on top of things. So in terms of the domains, with respect to leadership, there is a clear and compelling vision for learning, and it's shared by top organizational leaders. There's clear accountability and responsibility for the learning and education business, and succession and transition plans are in place. To go back to John's comment about turnover, this is an organization that's ready to retain people, but also has plans for turnover when it happens. And there's a culture of learning that exists throughout this type of organization and its audience, because they share in that vision for learning that's been articulated by the organization. In terms of strategy, a clearly articulated strategy provides distinctive positioning for the learning and education business and its offerings at this stage. The strategy is communicated, it's understood, it's embraced throughout the organization. There are clear objectives and metrics, and these are tracked and responded to on an ongoing basis. In terms of capacity, the business has the necessary resources, and that's both human resources and technological resources, to address current needs, as well as the resources to support ongoing innovation and growth. And at this stage, processes are well defined and they're continuously evaluated, they're continuously improved, and the business consistently invests in staff and volunteer development. So they're really investing in making sure their own people are great at this point. In terms of portfolio, the business understands learner needs and effectively aligns modes of learning and teaching with those needs and with the business strategy, and the business works to meaningfully assess the change created by learning. So you actually know at this stage that you are having an impact because you're measuring the level of impact that you're having both on individual learners and even more broadly on the field and industry that you're serving. In terms of marketing, the business has a validated understanding of its market and the competitive environment. It makes appropriate use of segmentation, and it establishes priorities for those segments. It has multiple marketing channels that are used strategically and that are continuously measured. And then, a strong learning business brand exists and is strategically positioned relative to the organizational brand. So this is, clearly established as a learning and education business with a brand that is recognizable, even if it is within an overall organizational brand. So, as you might expect, we're going to come back to some polling here. We asked you earlier about the domains and where you felt weak and where you felt strong. And now that we've actually described the stages of maturity, and those again are static, reactive, proactive, and innovative, we'd like to hear at which stage do you intuitively think your learning business is. So let's see where people fall here. We hope we haven't depressed anybody by talking about stage 4, which I think a lot of organizations feel is out of reach, but we see many organizations moving in that direction. Okay, we're getting close to half the people voting. Again, those of you who are multitasking, tune in here and let's vote, and we're going to close it down in about 5 seconds. Okay, so let's see what we got. Pretty reasonable mix. We got that sort of bell curve type thing going. So good number of organizations that feel they're in that static and reactive camp, about 40%. But we do have a heartening number, 42% saying that they feel they're proactive and 8% saying they're innovative. And of course, when we talk about the assessment here, we'll talk about going out broadly and getting input from others, to help balance out and make sure that you truly have a clear perspective on where you are. But I would suspect that organizations that are at least starting to skew towards at least proactive are probably the types of organizations that are likely to show up on a webinar like this and take an interest in the topic of learning business maturity, because you're already focused on that intuitively, even if you'd never heard of our framework before. So great.
So in that poll that we ran, we asked you to intuitively say where your business is, and in the other polls, again, it was intuitively, how do you think you're doing in each of those domains? But that kind of gut level reaction is fine for a quick take, but it's obviously not very rigorous, and it's also just your opinion, and odds are you aren't the only one working in your learning business. So if you want to really dig into the maturity model, we have an assessment that you can use, and that assessment in paper format is available at tagoras.com/maturity, and you see a screenshot of it here. The assessment is made up primarily of 40 statements, so 8 for each of the 5 domains: leadership, strategy, capacity, portfolio, marketing. And then for each statement, assessment takers are asked to indicate whether they agree or disagree with that statement in terms of their learning and education business. And it is important that they need to respond in terms of their learning and education business as it currently exists, not as they wish it existed. I will note that there are 5 answer options currently in the paper-based assessment: strongly agree, strongly disagree, disagree, neutral, agree, and strongly agree. But in an online version of the assessment, we've added a 6th option, no information. And as we've mentioned, we're looking to improve the model and the assessment over time. And this is just one small example of a change we've made based on feedback from an organization using the assessment. We certainly encourage that sixth option, the no information, to be used sparingly, but we did realize that some respondents may truly not have information about a particular point and therefore can't give a meaningful answer to it, but could give meaningful answers to most of the other statements. And so, one thing when you're looking at your results, when you do it with your team, looking at how many no informations you get in response, it will be a meaningful data point, and then looking at who those no informations come from. And to that point, another piece that's not yet in the paper-based assessment, but we do have it in the online version, is that we have two demographic questions up front. One asks whether the respondent works primarily in the learning and education business, yes or no, and then the other asks whether she's in a leadership role or a management role or working as an individual contributor. So we'll make an offer that if your organization has a paid SurveyMonkey account, it does have to be a paid account. We can't do it to free SurveyMonkey accounts, but we can transfer the assessment that we have in our SurveyMonkey account to yours so that you don't have to recreate it. And if you want to do that, you can just send an email to support@tagoras.com and you can ask for the survey, and we'll just need the username of the admin on your SurveyMonkey account to be able to share that. But we also want to give you some ideas for how to make use of the assessment.
So in terms of some best practices here, enlist a diverse range of stakeholders to take the assessment, and the stakeholders, should be limited to those who can respond to the questions. So it's not going to include your learners or customers. There are definitely good reasons to survey those folks, but this is not, one of the areas where they're going to be able to really provide you with meaningful input. And it may only include a subset of staff, make contractors, volunteers, such as subject matter experts. So, if you're learning and education business as part of a larger organization, then you should also include stakeholders from the larger organization, who may not be directly part of the learning and education business, but nonetheless, have a lot of knowledge and perspective on it. Those might be technology folks, it might be marketing folks, might even be board members, that do have the perspective and can provide the input. So, and as Celisa suggested, a low number of potential assessment takers, may tell you that you need to spend time in the future educating staff and others to grow the pool of people who are aware of the learning and education business. So, we definitely recommend a minimum of 3 people participating so that you get that sort of triangulated perspective. We don't suggest a maximum. The more stakeholders you can engage in the process, the more confident you can feel that the results truly reflect the maturity of your businesses, of your learning and education business. And most organizations are going to cap out at a reasonable level anyway of people who are actually going to be in a position to respond to this. So after the individual assessments have been completed in average, you're going to convene the stakeholders to discuss it. You might want to also do some cross tabs using the demographic questions that are part of the survey. So is there a significant difference between the responses from those working primarily in the learning business versus those who are working more tangentially? For example, does the view of leadership vary significantly from the view of individual contributors or managers? Obviously this is going to depend on how large a number of people you have working within your learning and education business. And then, in situations where the outcome is particularly contentious, you may even want to ask the stakeholders to retake the assessment after the group discussion to get a new aggregate score. And then, of course, you're going to want to come back to the assessment periodically to see how the responses change over time.
And so the assessment's going to yield 2 scores. It's going to give you a score for each of the 5 domains as well as an overall score. And the overall score is going to help you determine that overall stage of maturity. And then the scores for each of the domains will help you identify the domains that need the most attention and work so that you can move to the next stage of overall maturity and help you see where you have strengths to build on. I think both the domain level scores and the overall score are going to be helpful in understanding how your learning business currently performs and where you might need to focus on improvement. But we also encourage you not to blindly accept the scores. Be sure and review the descriptions of learning businesses at those stages. Does it seem accurate for your organization? Where do you disagree? This is part of what you can do in that group discussion with your stakeholders that Jeff was just talking about. And I'll say too that we're excited to be getting some results in from organizations using the maturity model and the assessment. And this is a sample of the results from a large international organization. They had 11 folks respond to the survey, and the overall assessment characterized them as a stage 2 reactive learning business, though as you can see here they are a little weaker in the strategy domain, still at stage 1 static there. And again, this is to be expected. We believe that most businesses don't perform the same in all of the different domains. They're likely to have some that are stronger and some that are weaker. But it's really exciting for us to be getting some of these real world results and feedback. And in terms of next steps, if you're intrigued by the maturity model and want to make use of it, we encourage you to go to tagoras.com/maturity. There you can get a PDF that lays out the model, and you can get access to the assessment. And so we encourage you to start by reading more about the model and then using the assessment. And once you get your group assessment results, then of course the next step would be to focus on improving and building on strengths and then shoring up the business where it's weak. And one thing to note is that we sometimes hear language about kind of focusing on strengths and building on strengths, but with the maturity model, you really do have to ultimately master all 5 of these domains. If you want to get to that stage 4 innovative learning business, you really can't ignore any of the 5 domains. And then I'll also mention too that if you have feedback on the model or if you make use of the assessment, we would love to hear from you, and you can let us know what you're finding out with your use of the model and the assessment by sending a note to support@tagoras.com. Jeff and I will see that. We really do want feedback and input. We look forward to continuing to iterate on the model, and then too, if you do want the online assessment and you have a paid SurveyMonkey account, again, we'd be happy to share that if you send us a note to support@tagoras.com. And then I'll also mention that we just have a variety of resources available at tagoras.com/resources that will help you progress and become more mature as a learning business. And on our roadmap is a more intentional mapping of the resources that we have on hand to the learning business maturity model. And then we think too, over time, the development of other resources that are going to help learning businesses progress and grow. So at this point, we've covered pretty much everything on the agenda other than your questions and comments. And so if you haven't yet submitted a comment or a question and you have one, please use the question pane to do that. And I'm going to hand it over to Jeff now to facilitate the final Q&A.
Jeff, this is John Alex, and just since you started, since you've been out in the field with this maturity model, which is exceptional, so thank you for contributing this to the practice here of what we do. But as you've been out, has your view of, your generalized view of where people are, where associations are at, where learning businesses are at, has that changed? Did you have a view going into this that a certain percent were at a certain level?
I'm not sure that our view of that has changed so much. I mean, we figured it would probably end up being, somewhat bell-shaped, similar to what the responses were here. Though I think, as we were commenting, this group, I think, skewed a little more towards proactive than we might expect out in the broader sector. We think there might be a little more on the reactive side, and there might be a little more on the static side. So, it's going to be interesting to see over time. I mean, it's fascinating. Celisa just showed the data that we got in. I mean, this is from a large international organization, well-heeled organization, one that I can guarantee you, has strategy out the teeth at the organizational level, all of the capacity in the world, and this is how their learning and education business shows up. Now, it may be, that this is a particularly self-critical group. I don't know, but, I think my sense is that it's probably going to be eye-opening to a lot of people within organizations, not necessarily to the people who are running learning and education businesses, because a lot of times the leaders in those parts of organizations, realize that they're not getting the emphasis and the resources that they need, particularly since they're, generally looked to generate non-dues revenue, and certainly because education is in the mission statement of, probably more than 75% of associations. So they know that they're not really getting the focus on it that they need. I think what's going to be interesting is, I've had at least one opportunity so far to put this in front of a board. I think it is a great tool to put in front of a board to, open a board's eyes and really spark some discussion and get them thinking about the fact that, yes, this organization is in the learning and education business. It is fundamental to mission. It does have financial implications, and to get their perspective on things. And I think it's probably going to, if I had to guess, to the extent that it catches on and spreads, it's going to create something of a thirst for more knowledge about what is going on in this part of the business, which, upsides and downsides to that, it's going to be, more accountability and responsibility, but of course, true leaders are going to want to step up to that anyway. Hopefully, it's going to mean more resources flowing in eventually as well. And John, you had also asked another question, or just, I think you made the comment, because we're talking about, percentages and where organizations fall, and we've got, 17% on the call here who are falling into the static realm, and you pointed out, that 10%, only 10% of new businesses survive. So if you're not up in that sort of 8%, or the upper ends of that 42% for proactive range, like we had on the call here today, should you be fearful? And you asked, do you think associations investing in learning businesses understand this? And what can they do to increase success potential? And certainly, our hope with this is that this will help to increase success potential. I mean, anybody who's been an entrepreneur, as I know you have, John, and I'm sure people on this call have, we certainly have been, know that, entrepreneurship is only risky if you're not being intentional and you're not being conscious and you're not being strategic and you're not taking the calculated risk that are going to lead to the type of growth that is going to result in the maturity of your business and ultimately the success of your business. And when we talk about learning and or associations and other organizations needing to think of themselves as learning and education businesses, it's not that it's all about money or that it's mercenary. It's about, really getting into place those types of processes, approaches, perspectives, attitudes that contribute to success and that are going to get you past, that 10% of new businesses that don't survive. I think it's probably true if you talk about, new products being launched out into the market by any learning and education business. In a lot of cases, those are not flying. Those are sort of mini businesses that are crashing and burning because, the types of approaches that we've described here are not really being taken. I do not see any other questions at this point, and we are at the end of our time, so I'm going to turn it back over to Amber to take us out.
Well, thank you so much, Jeff and Celisa, for the wonderful presentation of the Learning Business Maturity Model. For all attendees, thank you for joining us today. There will be a survey as soon as I close the webinar if you're able to give us some feedback to help our series. Other than that, thank you for joining us. I will send a follow-up email with the recording. Have a great rest of your day. Thank you.